Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Omar to the stage.
Thank you, Opa. Good afternoon, everyone. You guys are awake. Maybe just a story. So this morning when I got up this morning, went to gym, got back, and I said, cool, what am I going to wear? I got dressed, put on my suit, and I was about to get out the door, and my wife stopped me. She said, babes, aren't you presenting today? So I said, yes. She said, but you're wearing techies. And I said, yeah. She said, well, you're probably 10 years too old to wear techies in a suit. I said, don't worry. I'm presenting to a bunch of techies. I'll fit just right in. It's an interesting topic, right? For me, when I thought about this, and Opa told me, why don't we talk about return on investment? I'll ask a question. How many of you see spending on cybersecurity as a sunk cost? Anyone? So all of you see that there is some level of return or strategic investment when it comes to it. Doing research on the topic and, of course, looking at the clients we speak to, we also understand there's differing views on it. And it's sometimes not as easy and often as complex to be able to get to it. And often we see CISOs taking a strategy to the board meetings or storytelling, telling the story, which actually works quite wonderfully in terms of what the risk is, etc. So, I'll go through the slides. There's quite a few slides. I'll try and be as quick as possible, Opa, to make up some time. And the slides, Desiree, if you can share it with the colleagues later, I'm happy with that. But I'll touch on some key points on it from that perspective. So maybe just a bit of context, of course. You guys all know this here. You guys are the techies in the room. You'll teach me about it. But why invest in cyber? Of course, we've heard presentations around regulatory compliance. Reputation for me is massive because reputation is understated. Reputation is why we do business. It's about trust. We lose the trust, we lose the reputation, we're out of business. Employee and stakeholder safety, fostering collaboration in terms of growth. Across jurisdiction and internally as well, data protection, etc. So for me, cyber is important. Every client I speak to, their number one risk is cyber. Are they doing a good job about it? We'll get to that just now. Everybody spoke about stats. I said, why not throw some stats in there as well? 50% of South African organizations are suffering at least 4 cyber attacks, with 10% of them getting 9 or more. The average cost of a data breach is in South Africa for 2024 from the IBM report this year was 53 million rand on average. Phishing attacks, you can read the data there as well. 12% of phishing attacks accounted for of security breaches in 2024 on average cost of 56 million. So we can see the stats out there that we can see all organizations are being attacked. Attackers are getting in, and there's compromise to the business. There's impact from a financial perspective. The scary stat for me is 87% of organizations in South Africa currently don't have adequate cyber skills and resources. Now we know that the skills and scarcity of cyber resources is a reality. However, are we doing enough to move past that? Is this something we're going to keep on saying for years and years and years to come? We've seen trends in terms of cyber investment. We spoke about it earlier. We picked up a couple of elements in terms of where we're seeing investment in cyber. Of course, organizations focusing on POPI and banking ethics coming out from a regulation perspective. Any other regulations coming out from that perspective is key, and we see organizations focusing there. The question around managed service providers versus in-house capability always comes up, and we see often organizations taking that route as well. If MK was here, she'd be happy to see that insurance is a growth area in terms of cyber insurance as well. Incident response, cloud security. A key thing for me, of course, is integration of AI and machine learning. It's an element that's going to grow further and further and further. Vijay, we just saw what you did here in 5 minutes, which was amazing. For me, it's how do we use it for our advantage, because organizations are going to use it to grow revenue, to grow business, etc. Attackers are going to use it to understand business better and be more sophisticated. Would we see adoption and investment into them? The block on the left is increased spending. I would rather say what we're seeing, and based on what we discussing with clients, is maybe not increased spending, it's continuous spending and some questionable spending. If I was a CFO sitting in this room and I heard every single presentation before this, a lot of us talking about AI, regulation, insurance, etc. All I'm thinking about is where I'm going to get all the money for this. I need money to be able to grow the business, but at the same time, how important is security, how much is enough? And that brings me to the paradox in terms of increased impact of data breaches creates a paradox of, while more spending is necessary to combat cyber challenges, spending is not directly linked to profit. Or is it? It's very different, as Opa said, when you talk about projects. I work on large implementations, organizational redesigns, etc. And easily you can talk directly in terms of where we're going to see profit of a new service being launched, a new product being launched, a new system put in place. When it comes to cyber, it's not as clear. Also picked up that organizations that view cyber security as a sunk cost run the risk of measuring value based on spend rather than benefits being delivered. So it's not a cost, it's an investment. And I think that's the key element where CISOs and CFOs need to get alignment and get the board aligned in terms of where we are and where we're going. So is there ROI when investing in cyber? I think so. And I'm quite confident that if we sit together within the organization, we can prove that. However, there's many ways in terms of how do you want to depict it. And calculating the ROI is not as simple as doing it on another investment you may do. Key things to look out for from that perspective. So of course, ROI is your return on financial investment for any potential costs that you put in play. Anything your financial return on investment in terms of what you spend from a cyber perspective. It's investments gained on security measures compared to the potential costs of security incidents. So it's how much you've prevented security incidents, either it be reputational, what's it quantified to, data loss, what's it quantified to, what you've picked up from an incident perspective and what they would have impacted the company. The average cost of an incident multiplied by the number of incidents of the business might experience is a way of calculating it. I'll take you through another way of doing it as well. But often, if you really look at the numbers and you really extrapolate it with some level of reasonable assumption, your benefits outweigh your costs tremendously from a cyber perspective, especially if you're strategic on it. Key elements to calculate the ROI is the cost of incident is basically the estimate the average financial impact of past and potential future security breaches. Prevented losses, evaluate how much could be saved by reducing the frequency and severity of an incident. Operational efficiency, that's self-explanatory in terms of continuity. And of course, regulated compliance is preventing those fines, preventing the reputational damage. Often, one attack and one impact will have not only an impact on one of these areas, but on many of it in terms of getting right through whether the organization can continue operational or not. I won't touch too long on this here, but another way of looking at it is, of course, cybersecurity ROI is benefits minus the total cost of what you've invested in, and just times it by a percentage, 100 to get the percentage return on investment with regards to it. The key thing for me is understanding what do we mean by benefits and what we're tracking for benefits. And I'll go through some KPIs later in terms of how do we quantify benefits of cybersecurity. Because often we see security experts talking about data and showing KPIs in terms of what are the data points. How do you take that and extrapolate it into financial information that makes sense for a board and CFO, etc. The key thing as well is in terms of understanding where to invest, how much to invest, and what's the strategy of investing. What we've seen across the landscape of organizations is, given the political landscape, the geopolitical landscape, impact from a cost perspective, and organizations pushing a drive for digitization, automation. On the one hand, it exposes you more from a risk perspective. On the other hand, the purse strings are tight. Organizations find it difficult in terms of where do we prioritize, what do we prioritize, and often the biggest one shouting is where the benefit comes, we'll prioritize first. We've seen organizations that haven't thrown a lot of money into cyber at least do the basic things, which is focusing on the employee and awareness, so creating a security culture in terms of making sure that you have enough awareness and training for one of your weakest links, which is your employees. In terms of understanding of cyber, understanding of the involvement and the exposure they may give to the organization. And then after that, a few of my other colleagues spoke about your multi-factor authentication and look at your passwords, firewalls, etc. However, when we talk to organizations, we want to take a much more strategic view to cybersecurity. I call it intentional and enhanced cyber investment, is looking at an organization in terms of their approach to create an effective, resilient, and mature cyber environment. Often I speak to Kuda, which we work quite closely together, and we speak to clients about a cyber maturity assessment. And initially when I spoke to him and I came into the organization, I go, what is that? And it's actually a really great tool to give you a current state of where you are. We often see organizations going and investing in technology, investing in ways of protecting themselves without understanding the current state, without understanding what's their risk landscape. So, I mean, I've touched on, I put up a few bubbles here in terms of what do you mean by cybersecurity investment? Again, I'll say a structured, intentional, deliberate approach to build a robust cybersecurity strategy that focuses on return on investment, which basically means start off and understand what's your maturity in terms of where you are. We use the NIST framework. Understand where you are in terms of where you want to get to. From there, understand where's your key risks or the top risks facing the organization. Then look at what's available out there and what's the journey to get there. Doing a cost-benefit analysis. Opa spoke again. Everything we do, even with my family at home, is what's the cost versus benefits? Should we invest in this or shouldn't we invest in it? What else is out there in the market? Open up your eyes and your mind in terms of where can you invest and where should you invest. Employee training for me is key. That should be part of your strategy. It's creating a culture of cyber resilience and cyber awareness across the organization to improve the risk posture with regards to it. And then you look at some operational components in terms of your incident response planning, monitoring and metrics. What are you monitoring? How are you reporting back on it? Engagement stakeholders. And always looking forward in terms of what is there from a technology perspective, both from a cyber side perspective or where the organization is building. We often see in organizations that have a cyber strategy is de-linked to the organizational strategy. And for me, that's a big mistake. It's critical to see what's the key drivers from an organization in terms of digitization, automation, expansion in jurisdictions, cross-border, etc., in understanding where should we build from a cyber perspective. You've got to build a base, and of course from there, look at where we leverage. Where the cybersecurity strategy would take you is getting some level of alignment with your CEO, CFO, board, and executives in terms of what's the journey. Why are you always tapping into and putting the hand in the pocket to be able to invest into cyber? Investment in cyber is never going to stop because change in your business landscape should never stop. What the attackers are trying to do in terms of sophistication is going to continue. You need to always do a risk assessment to understand where you are against where your key risks and threats are, and then look back in terms of where you need to be and where you want to invest in. There's a number of different ways you can look at in terms of doing a risk assessment. You can look at likelihood versus impact. You can also look at the FAIR approach, which talks about your risk versus magnitude. There's different ways you can look at that in terms of assessing it. The key takeaway from this slide is we talk to organizations in terms of be intentional, understand what the competitor landscape is doing, understand where you're playing, and understand where your risk exposures are, and make sure you have a clear path to close that. While thinking about this here, I almost said, okay, where do we find CEOs, CFOs, and CISOs? Both have sort of interests of heart of an organization all the time. But the key thing is sometimes there's priorities that are not always aligned. And I often find that there's potential miscommunication and misalignment in terms of where we're going. A key thing for a CFO is they want to invest to make sure there's growth in the organization. They manage cost. They manage the bottom line. But also, they need to manage sustainability of that organization as well. I mean, CISO, of course, the key thing is the heart is in protecting the organization from any vulnerabilities and threats, which requires investment. And often we're finding there's a challenge in terms of prioritization of whether we should invest in a cyber technology or initiative or not. And the communication out of there is not often clear in terms of what's the benefit to the organization, what's the opportunity cost, and what's the potentially risk. So key things we said, I want to touch on is speak a common language, is understand where the organization's at. If you have a clear strategy, the language should be very clear, not taking too much of technical jargon there, but the common language for me is bringing in examples in terms of where are we to our competitors, how does it actually work, what are the use cases, and what is it actually exposing us to. Apply a risk lens and risk priorities to it. We spoke about in the earlier slide. Is together with the board is understand where your key risks are, how you'd like to mitigate those risks, what risks you apply to agree to accept, which risks you apply, agree to defer. It all depends on where you can invest. You're never going to invest all at once. I'll touch on the right data in slides to come as well, but the critical thing is are we providing the right data to the board? Is it all about just metrics in terms of and technical jargon that's coming to the board, or are we able to quantify some of the data that's going to make it real? Are we able to provide examples of what's happened to our neighbors next door that will make it real? What's happened to us before, that'll make it real for them as well. Distinguished security solutions. I mean, cyber's massive. Our tech companies are brilliant in innovation. There's a number of the solutions out there. Again, distinguish between where you want to go. Where's the right play? Are you going for in-house developed solutions? Are you looking at in-house capability, or are you looking at managed service providers? And develop an investment maturity mindset. What does it mean? Is when you're investing, always look back in terms of what's the cost and benefit with regards to it. Draw a journey in terms of where we need to invest, where we'd like to invest. Key outcomes we're going to see from that there is a risk-focused strategy, alignment between the board and trust in the board and the CISO, a vision and strategic alignment. So alignment of security priorities to the organizational growth strategy or cost reduction strategy, more stable and secure and mature organizational postures, and of course look at cost efficiency or efficacy with regards to it. This slide is some of it's a bit repetitive, but the key thing I want to take off from this slide is understanding the current state and how we're developing a vision for the future state. Look at what the current assets are there. Often we find that there's some organizations work in silos, depending where your tech stack is sitting, etc. Where we find double counting, assets not being sweat, you're not sweating the assets, not really measuring where you're going to get most value out of it, and not really adopting a realistic target operating model. Everybody wants more cybersecurity skills and resources. Difficult to find, expensive to find. Really look at what is the real target operating model you want to get to from an organization perspective. And then focus on people and process, just not technology. Technology is one part of the entire equation. Des, can we get this to play, please? So next slide is going to talk about KPIs. You can just listen to the video.
Effective cybersecurity management hinges on tracking the right metrics, identifying and monitoring key performance indicators, or KPIs, ensures that your cybersecurity efforts are aligned with organizational goals and are continually optimized. First up, we have incident detection time, also known as mean time to detect. This measures the average time it takes to detect a cybersecurity incident. Faster detection leads to quicker responses and minimized damage. Next is incident response time, or mean time to respond. This tracks the time taken to respond to an incident after detection. A lower MTTR indicates an effective response strategy. The phishing success rate is another critical metric. By monitoring the success rate of phishing attacks, you can assess the effectiveness of your phishing awareness training programs. Patch management efficiency is all about how quickly you apply critical patches across your systems. This KPI helps in reducing vulnerabilities. User privilege management is crucial too. Measure the percentage of users with access beyond what's necessary for their role. Minimizing excess privileges reduces the risk of insider threats. Then, there's the security awareness training completion rate. Track the percentage of employees who complete regular security training to ensure your workforce is prepared to handle threats. Vulnerability remediation time measures the time taken to remediate known vulnerabilities. Quicker remediation reduces the window of opportunity for attackers. Data breach costs are also essential to track. By measuring the financial impact of data breaches, you can evaluate the effectiveness of your security measures. Compliance score is another key metric. Measure your organization's compliance with industry regulations and standards, which helps in avoiding legal penalties and maintaining trust. Lastly, monitor the false positive rate in your threat detection system. Aim to minimize unnecessary alerts that could lead to alert fatigue. So, to wrap it up, key KPIs include incident detection and response times, phishing success rates, patch management efficiency, user privilege management, security training completion, vulnerability remediation time, breach costs, compliance scores, and false positive rates. Tracking these metrics ensures a well-rounded and effective cybersecurity strategy.
So interestingly enough, I mean, when I reflected on that, I asked the question, are these really strategic measures? Or are they more operational measures? And the question I asked myself, so what? So what if you track these, and what's the impact to business? Boards are questioning more because we're spending money, yes, and we're tracking operational components to it. There's value in it because we can see progression in terms of maturity within the organization. But is it having a real impact to the organization? And again, for me, then it talks to, are we and do we really track, quantify, or can we quantify these measures? Can we change the language in some of the boardrooms that talks directly to how is it impacting the organization from a financial perspective? Yes, I fully agree that the storytelling of a security posture of an organization is critically important in terms of what's the potential exposure, where we are against our competitors, where we are against the threat landscape, and giving use cases around it for the board to understand the journey of why cyber is important and how do we actually mitigate that risk or manage that risk. But it's also key to try and look at these here in terms of historical incidents and threats, and how do we quantify those and look at predictive future ones and putting money behind it. And explain and making the board and the CEO, CFO understand in terms of what's the potential cost of downtime, what's the cost of lost revenue, what's the cost from a regulatory fine perspective, what's the impact in terms of a reputation component, estimated reduction in incident detection and handling costs. If we're getting, what's the efficiency around that there and what's the cost with regards to it. Avoidance of compliance costs. So if we're saving the organization from any compliance issues, it's a benefit that the cyber or the security team is bringing to the organization, is making that clear and visible in terms of where it is. Remediation, cost avoidance. Again, all those costs is not just the breach, but it's again, how do you mitigate and recover from that breach, which is quite key. A key component for me is, of course, the efficiency gains and trust. We often underestimate in terms of a secure and a very well-defined and secure organization in terms of investment of cyber, what it creates in the environment in terms of opportunity of collaboration, further business, customer trust, and loyalty as well, which can, again, using different assumptions and models can be predicted to move forward. A key thing for me in moving away from the financial component is providing a continuous view in terms of what's the overall organization's risk posture, linked to where we started off from a strategic perspective, what's the change in the landscape and how we've improved in terms of maturity score of where we want to get to, and indicating overall benefits to employee, customer, and competitiveness. Often cybersecurity and incident can definitely change the landscape from a competitor perspective as well. It's important to be that we're not complacent with regards to a cyber strategy. I think once you've got one today, it's going to change probably very soon because of the changes in technology, the progression of business, and the new threats out there. So it's continuously being on the button in terms of understanding where you are, what's changing, and what needs to shift in your strategy. Of course, is the ability to be agile and have agility built in your strategy and the way of work with regards to that. And I mean, for me, where we want to get to is a proactive and adaptable cybersecurity posture. One that's continuously improving and has the ability to monitor and adapt as required. Emphasis on security culture and the culture of security at all times. A clear and very efficient incident response strategy and execution of that. and of course the ability to evaluate and report on cyber security ROI and investments. There's been millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions that's put into cyber, which is critically important because we're securing the organization. But there's questions being asked in terms of how much more, where do we spend, what are we getting back in return from it. I think it's important that we, even though from a tech perspective, keep our mind in thinking it from a business perspective in terms of how do we create resilience in the organizations we serve. We often have the conversation with our clients in terms of the full landscape. It's not that we just come in to do a penetration test for you and identify it, but it's understanding where are you, where's your current risks, what have you been exposed to over the past years, how have you remediated, have you matured, what is the root cause if you're not maturing, and what is the sentiment in terms of going to the board, going to your IT committees, ITS committees, IT excos in terms of how you position yourself from a risk rating. How would you remediate the risk rating from a red to an amber to a green? How do you maintain a green, or how do you be comfortable with an amber rating in terms of risk exposure, etc.? So my key takeaway is always think about cybersecurity as, for me, is a critical and strategic investment. Speaking to clients or looking internally into your organization, the key thing is looking at it from a holistical perspective in terms of we're in here to do business. We can't go and throw everything in the kitchen sink to one problem. We've got to think about it strategically and take it bit by bit, but be aware in terms of where's your gaps, where's your most critical risks and vulnerabilities, and as a board or as an exco, have a clear plan in terms of where we're remediating, how we're remediating, and how do we mature over time. And we'll continuously invest in this space, but we've got to be mindful of what's out there in the market and how do we invest. And be able to track the right KPIs to be able to see, are we getting bang for our buck? If we put money into it, does it make sense? Are we tracking the value out of what's coming out from those solutions as well? And from there, take it forward with the organization and build resilient, mature, and proactive cyber managed organizations. Thank you.